Hi and welcome back. So, a new study out of the University of Alabama has shown the difference that 500 steps a day can make when it comes to the risk of cardiovascular disease. Enough waffling off me. Let's jump into the presentation and let's see what this new study out of the University of Alabama has got to offer.
This is a review of a piece I read that was penned by the American Heart Association that looked into how many extra steps per day significantly reduced the risk of heart disease, stroke, or heart failure. And there are links in the description below to the studies and the articles I used to put this presentation together. This new study found that walking an additional 500 steps, or about quarter of a mile per day, was associated with a sizably lower risk of heart disease, stroke, or heart failure. This is according to preliminary research that was presented at the American Heart Association's Epidemiology, Prevention, Lifestyle and Cardiometabolic Health scientific sessions in 2023. Erin E. Dooley PhD, lead researcher and an assistant professor of epidemiology at the University of Alabama's Birmingham School of Public Health, said steps are an easy way to measure physical activity, and more daily steps were associated with a lower risk of having a cardiovascular disease-related event in older adults. However, most studies are focused on early to midlife adults with daily goals of 10,000 steps or more, which may not be attainable for older individuals. So where did the 10,000 steps a day goal actually come from? From a doctor, a PhD, or an exercise scientist? Well, in the mid-1960s, Japanese marketers were trying to sell a pedometer named Manpokai, which generally translates to 10,000 step meter in English. The Japanese character for 10,000 roughly resembles a person walking. Personally, I can't see it. Can you? So 10,000 steps a day is 100% a marketing gimmick and not based whatsoever in any scientific or medical fact. Participants in the current analysis were part of a larger study group of 15,792 adults originally recruited for the ongoing atherosclerosis risk in the community study known as ARIC. The present-day study evaluated health data collected from the ARIC study Visit 6, 2016 to 2017 to evaluate the potential association between daily step counts and cardiovascular disease. Researchers analysed data from 452 participants who used an accelerometer device similar to a pedometer worn on the hip, and this measures their daily steps. Participants were an average age of 78, 59% were women, and 20% of the participants self-identified as black adults, 70% of whom were women and 30% of whom were men. So the devices were worn for 3 or more days for 10 or more hours per day, and an average step count was about 3,500 steps per day. Over the 3.5-year follow-up period, 7.5% of the participants experienced a cardiovascular disease event, such as coronary heart disease, stroke, or heart failure. Let's take a look at the findings. The analysis found, compared to adults who took less than 2,000 steps per day, adults who took approximately 4,500 steps per day had a 77% lower observed risk of experiencing a cardiovascular event. Nearly 12% of older adults with less than 2,000 steps per day had a cardiovascular event. That's compared to 3.5% of the participants who walked about 4,500 steps per day. Every additional 500 steps taken per day was incrementally associated with a 14% lower risk of cardiovascular disease. Professor Dooley noted, it's important to maintain physical activity as we age. However, daily step goals should also be attainable. We were surprised to find that every additional quarter mile or 500 steps of walking had such a strong benefit to heart health. While we do not want to diminish the importance of higher intensity physical activity, encouraging small increases in the number of daily steps also has significant cardiovascular benefits. If you are an older adult over the age of 70, start with trying to get 500 more steps per day. Additional research is needed to determine if meeting a higher daily step count prevents or delays cardiovascular disease, or if lower step counts may be an indicator of an underlying disease. Everyone can improve their cardiovascular health by following the American Heart Association's Life Essential 8. According to the American Heart Association, cardiovascular disease claims more lives each year in the United States than all forms of cancer and chronic lower respiratory disease combined. As with all studies, there are some limitations that do need to be considered. Participants have to enroll in the accelerometer device study, and hip-worn accelerometers are limited in capturing other activities that may also be important to heart health, such as cycling and swimming. Some participants were more likely to have at least some college or above education compared to the overall ARIC sample, and primarily identified as white and female, which may also limit the study's generalizability. Additionally, steps were only measured at one single point in time, and the researchers were unable to examine if changes in steps over time impacted cardiovascular event risks.
Well, I hope you found that interesting or informative, hopefully both. I've read quite a few of these studies now that relate to step counts per day, and the average seems to be between 4,000 and 6,000 steps per day when it comes to increasing your health and wellness. That said, they all also seem to caveat their study findings by saying, that said, the more the better. And there doesn't seem to be an upper limit where you're going to start getting diminishing returns. So it does look as though the more the better, but 10,000, as you know, is a marketing gimmick. I use my fitness tracker. I check it every day. I've also checked my monthly average. I've got it set to 5,000. I've changed it from the 10,000 because that, in some cases, was not attainable. My average for this month at the moment is 4,700 steps per day, so I'm happy with that. If you have a fitness tracker, do you know what your daily average is? Do you monitor it? And if you don't have one, do you guess? Because if you do guess, the chances are you will be a long way out. You don't really know how many or how few you take until you get a fitness tracker and you actually start to track your steps. I was quite surprised when I did that. Looking at this study, do you think that you could add 500 steps or another quarter mile to your daily step count as a way of reducing your risk of cardiovascular disease? Let me know in the comments below.